Good morning, everyone, tuning into Church Online today. We're so glad you're here. I'm Josh, and obviously Corey's with me. Hope you're having a great Sunday today. If you're wondering what's going on, well, for this series this summer, as we've been going through James, we've been doing this thing called Common Conversations, where we sit down with the speaker each week and kind of dig deeper into the message for the day and have a bit more like conversation style as opposed to maybe like a sermon or a message. But if you want the sermon, and you can hear that too, that'll be online tonight at 6 p.m. on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. You can check us out at 6 p.m. to hear today's sermon that happened out on the hill.
And I hope that this would be like complementary to the sermon. So you might catch something today that helps you understand something more about the sermon, or vice versa. Maybe you watch the sermon on the hill and then want to watch this after. So that's the hope anyway. We'll see.
Hopefully we'll unpack these verses a little more.
Yeah.
Maybe answer some questions you have. Maybe it gave you some questions you didn't know you needed or didn't know you wanted,
right?
Or don't want. But yeah.
So this week our text is James chapter 2, verses 8 to 13. We're in James all summer, which is a wisdom book in the New Testament. James, likely the brother of Jesus. The writing is really direct, and so it's been really fun actually to teach on James because the writing comes across so direct. There's also like really deep context. So it's good. Why don't I just read this text and then Josh, whatever captures your attention, we can kind of riff from there. But this is what James writes. It says, "You do well when you really fulfill the royal law found in Scripture. Love your neighbor as yourself. But when you show favoritism, you are committing sin, and by that same law, you are exposed as a lawbreaker. Anyone who tries to keep all of the law but fails at one point is guilty of failing to keep all of it. The one who said, 'Don't commit adultery,' also said, 'Don't commit murder.' So if you don't commit adultery but do commit murder, you are a lawbreaker. In every way, then speak and act as people who will be judged by the law of freedom. There will be no mercy in judgment for anyone who hasn't shown mercy. Mercy overrules judgment." James.
Well, when I first heard you read this earlier today, I felt like it was a lot. Mm-hmm. And it was hard for me to get my head around, actually. Like, I was like, what's he saying? What's he trying to get at here? Maybe could you like sum it up for me? Like maybe a big idea to get my head around it a little better?
Yeah, I think James is messing a little bit with the way we think about law, that most of us think about law in the context of like, here's the line, if you transgress it, here's the punishment. We often think about law primarily in like a civil way, like if you break this law, then this is the punishment. But I think what James is getting at is like a deeper, maybe morality, a deeper understanding. And I think that's what he's kind of playing with here of like, if you commit adultery, but don't commit murder, you've still broken the law. If you commit murder, but don't commit adultery, you've still broken the law. Our civil laws have a hierarchy of law, right? Like there are certain things you can do to have worse punishments. Which I think is good. Like, I think that's probably like, that's a good way to run a civil society.
A speeding ticket is different than murdering somebody.
So, exactly. Yeah. But I think that James, what he's doing with his writing here is trying to help us look deeper into our souls. It's kind of like Jesus at one point talked about like, if you commit murder, you think this is the punishment. But I tell you that even if you like have hate for someone in your heart, it's the same punishment. Jesus is not making like a civil proclamation. He's not suggesting that hating someone should have the same jail time as murder. What he's doing with this kind of this teaching is trying to help us understand that like murder comes from the same place inside of us that hate comes from. Regardless, is it regardless or irregardless? Irregardless of how we act, regardless of how we act.
It's like thaw or dethaw.
Yeah, that's right. Which one is it? So I think James is really trying to do that same kind of thing with this piece of writing, help us to look deeper into our souls and begin to maybe pull apart the ways in which we have the same maybe impulses that someone else, we might look at that someone else with judgment because of what they did, when we might have the same kind of thing going on in our heart, even though we didn't do what they did.
Yeah. It's so easy to look at somebody and be like, but they, without realizing, but I.
Yes. Yeah. So I think that's the whole like thing he's doing with his words here, like comparing mercy and judgment, that at the end of the day, judgment doesn't get us to a better moral standing. It might serve some civil purpose, but it doesn't bring us to a place where as a society or as a people, we're any closer to living into God's kingdom. He's suggesting that only mercy can do that, that we can have mercy on one another and maybe remove judgment from our way of being. And that's maybe how we can take steps closer to God.
That distinction actually helps me quite a bit. Even like talking about judgment, my brain wants to think about like God's judgment in a traditional classic God's going to judge you.
Yes.
Not necessarily judgment in a legal sense.
Right. Yes.
And that really, like, thinking about mercy and judgment in that way really opens the passage up for me, I think, in a different way, just you saying that, which is cool.
Yeah. I think, again, like, this is what I love about the book of James is he really is like, so in preaching, we talk about like topical preaching and expository preaching. Topical preaching is like you take a topic and you say everything about it. Expository is like you're taking a text and you're like trying to just pull from that text. James, I feel like, is doing like expository preaching of Jesus's teachings. Like he's not addressing things really topically. He's taking these teachings of Jesus. Usually he'll refer to them in a sentence and then try to like unpack that, where other books of the Bible are maybe more topical, like this church is having this problem, so we're going to try and, address that. And so I think for James, he's pulling out this idea that Jesus chose mercy over judgment, that, like some of the more graphic moments of Jesus, even on the cross, crying out for God to forgive the people who are murdering him, right? Like, rather than asking for God's judgment on them, he's proclaiming mercy toward them. And because I think for Jesus, if what we long for is for the world to be made right, judgment, again, like it maybe keeps unsafe people in barred places, but doesn't actually make the world safer or more saved. Mercy does that.
Can you talk about like some judgment in a justice sense is what we actually long for in the world, like that things would be made right.
Yeah.
But we tend to think of ourselves as the judges a lot. Or maybe we should err more on the side of mercy.
Yeah.
What's mercy look like to you in today's world, either externally or internally? When you think about mercy, how's that express itself today?
That's a good question. I think, we can look at, I think we all have like maybe different camps we align with, whether that's socially or politically or, anything that kind of divides society. We either have an opinion on one side or the other, or we abstain from having an opinion because we can't figure it out, right? Yeah. But all of us kind of stand somewhere. But like all of those camps, have judgment towards each other, right? So there's judgment from one side to the other. There's even judgment to people who like abstain from having an opinion. Like there's judgment from both those camps coming at that group,
How can you be in the sidelines?
Yeah, that's right. When this injustice is happening, and again, like I think sometimes we want the Bible to do things that it's not written to do. I don't think that's what James is critiquing. I think James is probably inviting, like in those kinds of situations, folks in all of those camps to think through a paradigm of mercy and what might it look like to have mercy on your enemy, to be like, I vehemently, I vehemently disagree with you. I even think your policy on this or your opinion on this is harmful. I think that leads us in a society to a terrible place. Like you can have all of those same opinions, and you can look at that other human being and have mercy towards them, and maybe begin to assume that, well, how you got to your opinion was through a chain of events, and how I got to my opinion was also through a chain of events, and maybe recognize that in both of our lives, that chain of events was filled with all kinds of judgment and missteps, and that neither of us here are probably fully right. Yeah. Neither of us really know if this is going to make the world a better place. So like, what if we could look at each other through that lens of mercy rather than judgment, right? Do I think that Jesus agreed with people crucifying him? I don't. I don't think Jesus thought that was the way the world should be, but he's able to look at the individuals in those spaces mercifully, with some maybe empathy, that they got there through a series of events as well. And I think that can even then play out in our relational lives. That, just speaking really honestly, I've sat with so many people in my church. I've experienced this in my own life, that through like political division, there's like friends that I don't feel as close to anymore because society has shaped us that way. That's terrible. How is that moving us to a better place? And so I think these principles, or these Jesus ideas, these Jesus instructions, help us to have better relationships too, to be able to look at somebody who we really disagree with, that is in our life, that we love and care about, and be able to come from a place of mercy, rather than judgment.
Yeah, something that you touched on there. It's so easy and common, I think, no pun intended, for people today to look at people who see the world differently and just think that they're stupid or they're ignorant,
yes.
or how could you think or believe that about this thing?
Yeah.
As opposed to thinking that maybe they came to where they're at from a really genuine posture.
Yeah.
Maybe truly want like the best for our world.
Yeah.
And this is how they see that happening.
Yeah.
Or these are the things that resonate with them. But we tend to write the other off as like extreme, or using like extremist language to push people aside.
Right.
Instead of like offering that mercy to them and saying, well, maybe their heart's as clear as mine, or as good conscience as it can be, or as mine can be.
Yeah.
As opposed to just assuming that there are so many examples in our world today.
So many.
That's tends to be the posture we approach things at.
Yeah. Yeah. The final words of my teaching this week, that I'm, and again, you'll have to watch teaching to see how we get there. But the final thing I say to our community is that, kind of implore us to have mercy on our neighbor, because God does, right? To have mercy on your enemy because God does, and to have mercy on yourself because God does. And I think that's the frame that we need to look through. It's not mercy for judgment's sake. So I think sometimes we can, like, even what I just described of like, you can kind of theorize why you might have empathy for somebody, and that is maybe helpful in the journey. But the text is written to people who have decidedly said, I want to center Jesus in my life. And so if Jesus has mercy on this person, then I want to do things, whatever I need to do in my own life, whatever practices I need to take on to also develop that same kind of mercy for that person. If Jesus has mercy on me, then I want to develop whatever practices I need to have in my own life so I can grow in mercy for me. If Jesus has mercy on his enemies and my enemies, then I want to develop whatever practices in my life I can to move towards that same kind of posture and mercy towards others, which I think that's where the real implications come when we look at like the media we consume. Like, is this practice like doing it for me? Probably not. Maybe the kinds of conversations we have with people, that I think we can have healthy conversation with people, but then we can also participate in those same conversations with people who have the same opinion as us, that others that person and judges that person. Well, the more I participate in that conversation, the more that same kind of judgment is building inside of my heart, right? So I think if without Jesus, I really think this makes no sense. Like, it's not just how to be a better person. It's like, well, how do I be more like Jesus? How do I take on this same posture as Jesus? And that really then caused me to look at the practices in my own life and maybe what other counter practices I might want to put in my life so I can grow in the capacity to see other people through a merciful lens.
One of the words that James uses here, that if you show favoritism to somebody, like I always show favoritism, like whether I mean to or not, it's it's my default posture.
Yes.
Like it's ingrained in me to show favoritism to those who see the world the way I do, or from the same socioeconomic status I am, or have the same background that I do.
Yes.
Like,
we don't do this in politics though.
No.
Other places. We're able to look at all the parties involved and give them the same fair shake.
Yeah. But like to think, so obviously like the text says that if I'm showing favoritism, that's missing the mark on what
that's right.
We're aiming for.
Yeah.
And that's like a low bar to hit to miss the mark. Like obviously we've all missed the mark on that.
Yes.
But that idea of coming back to mercy really seems like the only hope that we have.
And I think if you read that in the context of judgment, then you're like, oh, I'm screwed.
Yeah.
Like I got nothing.
Yeah.
But if you read it in the context of the text, you read it in the context of mercy, now those become opportunities for us to like catch ourselves, and not catch ourselves in our behavior, but catch ourselves in the way that we're wired on the inside, right? So when I catch myself showing favoritism, I can take a step back and go, man, I wonder how I might rewire my heart or my brain so that I do that less, you know? And again, I think that's the mercy piece. God is like, God is literally having mercy on us in that moment, right? As well, versus judgment. Drives us back to this like very common. This is why we've kind of called this series of teachings, this idea of common is that James drives us back to actually just like a common spirituality. Not this, it's not ethereal. It's not just an idea. It's not even like philosophical. James, if you follow James's flow, he's always driving us back to considering how this looks with our hands in the dirt, which is good times.
Yeah.
Good times. So if people want to hear more, the sermon from this morning will be posted at 6 p.m. tonight. But no, all summer, we're going to have teachings through the book of James, which all point us back to this common life, which I think this is I guess this is the spirituality I long for. Like I long for spirituality that matters in my life, not just that is like this separate category of my life or is for something somewhere else. But like right now, like how does Jesus's teachings affect my marriage and my parenting and my friendships and my politics and my social life, in my civil life, in my interactions? Like I want it in everything in my common life.
Yeah. I don't think the Jesus way works if it isn't central.
Agreed.
Like it's a broken system.
Yes.
If it doesn't work if it's not central. That's the way it functions.
And it is really frustrating. Like to try and live out the way of Jesus without making it central. Yeah. You'll always feel judgment.
Yeah. It pushes
all the time, which is really like anti-Jesus. So So
we gotta stop talking. We'll keep talking.
Yes, we do.
If you do want to catch like past conversations like this, we have some great people chatting.
That's right.
Past few weeks, or watch past sermons. Westwinds.org/common. You can see past videos and conversations and some of the music too. So check that out.
Yeah.
Either right now, you can click on a link, I'm sure, somewhere, or tune back in tonight at 6 p.m. for today's sermon.
And if you're watching live online, stay tuned for a little bit. There's more to come to help us kind of reflect and capture some of these thoughts. Bye, y'all.